Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the morning show, broadcasting on Channel 9 and also streaming on Port Media's YouTube channel. Just go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm just delighted to welcome today's guest. Kabria Baumgartner is here. She's Assistant Professor of American Studies at the University of New Hampshire. And Erin Seaton is here. She's Senior Lecturer in Educational Studies at Tufts University. And they'll be talking with us today about why it's so important for families to discuss racism and anti-racism, and we'll be offering suggestions to parents on how to talk about race. And then toward the end of the show, Vicki Hendrickson will be here to talk about Newburyport Adult and Community Education's outstanding lineup of summer classes. But let me introduce you to my first guest today. Dr. Kabria Baumgartner is the author of In Pursuit of Knowledge, Black Women in Educational Activism in Antebellum America. She teaches African American history, literature, and culture at UNH. And Dr. Erin Seaton is co-director of educational studies at Tufts University. Her areas of expertise include school psychology and diversity and inclusion leadership, and her research is focused on rural and urban education, gender and development, inequalities in education, and violence prevention in schools. So first of all, Erin and Kabria, just thank you both so much for taking the time to come on the morning show to talk about these important topics. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Well, I wanted to start out by asking you to comment on why it's important for families to talk about these issues. I was reading an article by a white educational consultant named Jed Court, and she noted that in her experience, white parents often feel ill-equipped to have conversations with their children about race because they feel as though they lack experience and qualifications to do it. That's certainly not an option that Black parents or parents of color have, of course. But she was mentioning that because parents feel ill-prepared to do it, they often are tempted just simply not to talk about it at all. But it strikes me that these days, children are seeing so much about racism and protests on TV, and if you're silent about it, it seems like silence is a message too, isn't it? And I wondered if you both could comment on what message that gives, whichever one of you would like to start. So,
Kabria?
Kabria, do you want to start?
Sure, I can begin. Yes, I was thinking about this too, particularly as, Black parent, the fact that for me, I can't really avoid the conversation about race, about injustice, about discrimination. Those conversations absolutely have to take place in my home. And so, I don't have that privilege, and neither do most people of color who are parenting children. I do understand, though, that there may be some difficulty, particularly among white parents, because they may not feel like they're well-versed in, the research on race or the history of, racial injustice in this country. But I think that's actually more of a reason to do the work of learning that history and reading that research and then sharing that with their children. So in this instance, ignorance is not an excuse, right? I think that we absolutely probably we just need to learn the history and teach it to our children. So we can't avoid it, and it's no use for us to be ignorant about it.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, a lot of the articles that I've been seeing and the newscasts I've watched on TV, people are making that point. And you know what? There's a lot of books that are bestsellers now. Me and White Supremacy, White Fragility. And so it does seem as though hopefully some people are getting the point that we have, cavernous gaps in our knowledge as white Americans. And there is some effort to fill in some of that gap, but then the next step, I suppose, is making sure you talk about it. So Erin, I wonder if you have some thoughts about that.
So as a white person living in a society that partakes in systemic racism, I don't think that I, as a parent, can raise my child without having these conversations. Otherwise, I'm participating in furthering that system. So it's really critical for white parents to see that silence indicates compliance with these systems. And I think For parents that are really struggling, Howard Stevenson, who's the brother of Brian Stevenson, who started the Equal Justice Initiative, has some great advice to just kind of slow things down, to talk about your emotions. So say to your child, I'm struggling with how to say this. I didn't grow up having these conversations, if that was the case for you. And then to launch into these even with young children. So children by the age of 2 are already forming an understanding of racial awareness and thinking about the systems and the societies, but the implicit and the explicit messages that they get from television, from media, from teachers. Yeah. So we're not protecting children when we avoid conversations. What we're doing is giving them skills that we would give them, just like we want children to have a healthy diet and we want them to exercise. We want them to be skilled from a very early age in talking about race and racism and their role, both in their own individual acts, but also in systemic racism as a system that places some people at advantage and disadvantage. And we can say to young children, it doesn't have to be complex. They may not understand the word systemic racism, but they can certainly understand when we say, oh, I was reading that book and I was really surprised. All the children look the same. That's not what your school looks like, or that's not what our friends look like. So we can point out the ways in which people are making choices. We can look at movies and say, I was really disappointed in the way that character, how that character was presented. That calls attention to systemic racism in a language that young children can understand, and then begin to bring those things to you as a parent. So encourage those questions. If if you're feeling like this is an emotionally laden topic, it's okay to tell that to your child. And to just take a breath and say, I feel upset and overwhelmed. I wonder how you feel. And if you as an adult are feeling that way, there's no way that a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old isn't feeling those emotions. But if we don't give children language, then they're really missing out on the ability to process those emotions, to share their feelings, and to participate in these really important conversations.
Those are excellent points, Erin. They remind me of something that the famous late Virginia Satir, family therapist, said once when she was talking about how families often don't deal with death and dying in families. She mentioned that oftentimes there'll be a funeral and people will be visibly very upset and sad, but when children ask them what's going on, the parents are tempted to say, oh, nothing, I'm fine, everything is okay, which all it does is teach children that there are certain emotions that it's wrong to talk about, to suppress. So anyway, what you said made me think about that. So I love those examples of using a movie, talking about your own emotions, just affirming that these are things to talk about and they're not always comfortable. So, well, the next thing I wanted to ask you each about was, how can parents explain to children what racism is and what kinds of examples might be useful that children will be able to understand and connect with? And Kabria, do you want to start?
Sure. So I was thinking about this question and the importance of, conversations about race. And I think those conversations have to be age appropriate. So I have 2 children, both of them fairly young. So I use books. I use books to talk about race, but also to talk about other social issues. When there were sort of the issues around asylum seekers, so there were some great books for children about immigration. So I really believe in using books as a teaching tool. At the University of New Hampshire, I research and write about school integration, the long history of school integration in New England, as you know.
Yes.
And I wanted to explain to my daughter my research. I wanted to talk to her about it. But obviously she can't quite read my book yet. She's 7, so.
One of these days.
One of these days. But I found a children's book that looks at one particular case in Boston. The book is called The First Step: How One Girl Put Segregation on Trial. by Susan Goodman.
Okay.
And it's a great book. It sort of profiles and describes the experiences of Sarah Roberts, who is about 5 years old in 1847. And she was expelled from a school in Boston, a white school in Boston, because of her race. And so this became a way for my daughter and I to have a conversation about skin color, discrimination, and racism. And so she's able to sort of have those conversations, even though she's only 7, and the book becomes sort of the starting point.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So you don't have to start from scratch. Sometimes there are resources and books out there that can start the narrative. It reminds me of some of what you were saying, Erin, about a movie and finding characters and situations that children can connect with. I wonder if you have thoughts about that question, Erin, other ideas or examples about how to communicate the meaning of racism to children.
Sure, and I think books are my go-to as well. I'm thinking about Separate is Not Equal, coming from an educational perspective, which deals with one of the first lawsuits against segregation in California schools from Mexican children and their families, and places children at the center of the conversation. The Youngest Marcher by Audrey Faye Hendricks is another book about the Children's March. And really places children at the center of activism. So I like those two as examples. I would also say that children are very responsive to the concept of fairness. This is something that young children are thinking about a lot. And so bringing up examples of fairness as a concept that young children can understand and participate in. And again, I think developmentally is right. So different conversations I have to teenagers who are definitely exposed to the media and news in a way that a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old probably isn't, because they have social media, connections. And so they're watching. And I think it's really important for adults then to ask, what are you seeing? What do you know? Tell me what you're thinking. So we also do spend a lot of time, especially right now that we're home and we can't do very much, going for walks. And those walks are almost always opportunities to check in with children about how they're feeling, what they've heard, how they're processing, and how I as an adult can help them then make sense of what they're seeing and hearing. So books, great material. We still read a lot of books for young adults. My daughter and I are reading Jason Reynolds' the Track series, which is a series of 4 books. I think exposing children to so many different perspectives and characters, making sure that the books that you read center on perspectives that are different from your own, and really helping children to value and understand how people think differently about the world and experiences. Jacqueline Woodson is another great author for elementary and middle school readers. I said Jason Reynolds, Sharon Draper as another author to put out there, particularly for middle readers. She has a recent book out called Blended that goes right to police shootings, but in a way that I think makes that conversation accessible for young readers.
Oh, excellent. Those are all, thank you both. Those sound like great resources. And I love the idea of talking about fairness because, of course, children totally connect. Every fight I ever had with my siblings was about things not being fair. And so that's immediately accessible as a concept and a passion to any child. So there's another question I wanted to ask both of you your thoughts on, because it's something I think that adults get confused about as well. And that's the difference between a person being a racist or having racist thoughts and beliefs. And even if you're a person who doesn't have racist thoughts and beliefs and might disagree with them, there are still racist systems. We've been hearing more, fortunately, about systemic racism and institutional racism, but it's something where people can get caught and say, oh, I'm not a racist myself, and often neglect then, yeah, okay, but there is such a thing as systemic racism or institutional racism, and I think a lot of adults just have a hard time connecting the one part of the brain with the other part of the brain. So I wonder what your thoughts are about how to explain or talk about these ideas.
I'm going to jump in if that's okay. Yeah. I feel like really tragically, this has become a political issue. And the idea of denying systemic racism is absurd. So we live in schools in every aspect of our lives that systemic racism exists, whether it's voting rights, whether it's education, whether it's housing, all the ways in which we have as a culture for 400 years have disenfranchised and taken away power and opportunity from white people have taken that away from people of color. So we can see this, in little ways. If you think about housing, we can see this if you think about education and systems of education, how segregated schools are. In fact, they're more segregated than they were 30 or 40 years ago. Looking at the curriculum, what do your students read at school? And why is it that those books are chosen? What history is being told? And why is it that some histories are told and others are excluded? So I think for children, if you're thinking about children in particular, it is really important to help them understand that racism exists on an individual and a systemic level, right? There are choices that we can make, and we can learn to be actively anti-racist. So preparing children, what happens if you see this? How do you respond if somebody is teased or bullied? If you see somebody or hear somebody in your class say something that you feel like is racist, how do you respond to that as an individual? But then really doing the hard work of examining the systems that we're in. Having kids go with you to vote, talking about voting as a way of changing laws or changing the structures of power, inviting kids into conversations about school and curriculum, being on the school board or advocating, going to a school board meeting, are all ways that we're teaching children about how we participate in those systems. Thinking about opportunities, for food and food assistance, and why there are disparities between who has access to materials. Looking at, going to a doctor's appointment and looking around and calling attention to the fact, who's working at your doctor's office or your dentist's office? What do they look like? And how are we thinking about who has those opportunities? So I feel like it's not a choice. We have to see the ways. If we want to become anti-racist, we have to see and name for our children both the individual and the systemic ways in which we're colluding in that system.
What I love about what you're saying, Erin, is that there are opportunities everywhere you go, every day, to think about those things, to talk about them, and to be reflective about them. And I love the idea of taking your kids with you to vote. That's just wonderful. So those are immediately accessible ways for parents to bring a reflection to their themselves and to their children. Kabria, was there anything you wanted to add on that topic?
I think Erin made some great points, and I just wanted to highlight one of those points, which is that it's really important that parents and teachers give children this vocabulary around race and racism. So I was thinking about this as the protests were, at a fevered pitch maybe a couple of weeks ago, and they're still ongoing. And, there was all of this, there was, of course, the media focusing on looting but there was also violence, right? We saw the ways in which some of the police departments responded to the protesters. And there was this question, well, how do I talk to my child about these protests that not all, but a few turn violent? And I was thinking to myself, well, we teach kids about the American Revolution. This was a war. Right?
Absolutely.
We find the vocabulary to do that. I think we can find the vocabulary to teach our children about racism. It's not a wonderful conversation to have, right? It's not necessarily a conversation that I welcome because it's so, it's beautiful. No, it's very difficult. It's very hard, and we have to engage it. We can't run away from it. So I agree with Erin that we need to give parents and teachers, in some ways empower them. Right. To provide this vocabulary and this language around race for their children.
Right, absolutely. You touch upon another question that I think is an important one, given what everybody is watching on TV, and that has to do with different kinds of experiences that people of different races have with the police. How to talk to children about some of what Black Lives Matter means, what the protesters are protesting, because this was launched by the murder of George Floyd on television. We've all seen it. So how do you explain to children why and how, children of color may have very different experiences and expectations of the police than white children who've grown up thinking of them as, protective and trustworthy sources? How do you begin explaining these kinds of things to kids? Any thoughts?
Sure. So I was thinking that, parents can describe the situation, right, to their children. But I just wanted to be clear that I do not think we should circulate the video of George Floyd's death, or really of any of the Black people who've been murdered by the police. I think those videos are very difficult in and of themselves. I remember watching 13th. I screened it in my class at the University of New Hampshire. Yeah. And, there's a part of it that actually shows a couple of the videos that came out, and I think it's 2014, 2015. And I had some students who said I'd never seen the video, and they were stunned. And they're, 19, 20-year-olds. So for me, these videos, on the one hand, we need them, it seems, as proof. And on the other hand, it does a lot of harm when we're thinking about Black death and the spectacle that Black death can become. So I wouldn't show videos to probably most children under the age of 18. Okay. I'm not even sure that, as adults, I don't know how equipped we are to handle what we're seeing, because I worry about us being desensitized to it. But you can explain what happened, and you can narrate the tragedy that was. I have a 7-year-old, and so I can explain to her that the police officer harmed George Floyd and hurt George Floyd, and that was wrong, and that people are marching because they want that police officer held accountable for the wrong that he did, right? Yeah. And that for a 7-year-old, I think that provides a decent explanation. And then if there are other questions, I can answer, those questions as they come up. I think one thing to be careful with is some of the people who demonize the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And so it's important for parents and teachers to handle that carefully. This is not a movement that says other people's lives don't matter. Right. It's not a violent movement. It's not, some might think it's radical, but it's actually not that radical.
No, it's not. To say that Black Lives Matter should not be a radical statement.
It's not a radical statement.
No, and it has a whole context around it. Of course, all lives matter. That's not what it's about.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So just being careful, around some of that language. I mean, 5 years ago, to even say Black Lives Matter for some people was a real controversy. So there is some change, there's some change in the air that now you have millions of people marching in the streets, holding up those posters that say, Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace. Kabria, I think 5 months ago, you would have encountered, this is kind of like, it's hard to keep up with, but something is churning. So anyway, it's interesting. I wonder, Erin, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add to what Kabria was saying?
I just really appreciate Kabria's point about not showing videos that are re-traumatizing. So I think that's an important piece. That piece about narrating, right? We can give children language, and we can say both that in George Floyd's case, individuals acted, but it wasn't one police officer. It was a group of police officers acting together. And we can ask children to speak to that conversation. What do you think happens when people are all joining together to hurt someone? Have you seen bullying at your school? Why is it that it makes it hard for somebody to stand up how can we learn to do that? And have we ever been in a place where it felt hard to speak out against something? So I think we can invite children into the conversation and think critically. I don't think we have to present everything as an either or. I think this is a really complicated question, and it rests both in an individual's act and in a system. And teaching that to children is a complicated and difficult thing, right? Because not every police officer is bad or racist. In fact, there are police officers that share multiple identities, but they live in a system that has significant military training, and that's part of that. And they live in a system where, from a very young age, white Americans are trained to see race and respond with bias. So I think it's really important to deconstruct help children kind of process how you would even get to that point. It's unimaginable to me. So it's really going to be hard for me to explain that. But at the same time, to be questioning those systems. Why is it that police carry guns? In the United States, police carry guns. In many, many countries, police do not carry guns. And so having that conversation about guns and whether or not police should carry guns, I think a teenager is capable of having a conversation like that.
Yeah.
And really raising that. But I think also, really speaking to what Kabria said about why are people protesting? This idea that if all lives mattered, we wouldn't need this protest, right?
Oh, that is well put, Erin. Yeah.
I don't think I came up with that. I'm sure I heard someone else say that. So
that's all right. Whoever came up with it.
Right.
I really like that. It kind of cuts to the chase.
Inviting children in to think about what they can do, not just to protest, to join that, but on a daily basis. What are they doing? We've had a lot of conversations in our family about what's our family doing. So what's our plan, and what's our plan beyond protesting, to think about how this work carries out every single day. I know that my children who are white children are equally afraid of police because they've seen the damage, and we've had these conversations. And so I think that conversation, even at home, we're thinking, why do we need police, and what would they look like, and what would it look like if we had people that really cared for the community? How would that be demonstrated? So I think my kids came up with the idea of like, well, if you really wanted to create relationships, why wouldn't you get to know the people that you're living with and serving? Challenging kind of the structures that we have right now. And I think children sometimes have wonderful access to ideas about how to challenge structures, for sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you've mentioned, you both have been talking about conversations you've had with your children. And of course, in a significant part of talking and having good conversations with children is listening to them. And so what I wanted to ask you about is, what are some of the things that you've heard from your children or children that you work with that have taught you things about racism or racial history?
I know one thing that my kids have been really disappointed about is the way in which their curricula at school, my children have attended multiple schools, so it's not a single school, has failed to address multiple stories, both in the history and the literature that they've read. And so I think they're really asking, they're living in a world where they don't see their friends represented, they don't see aspects of their own identity represented, and really thinking about the kinds of instruction and conversations that they'd like to be having at schools. So we need to be preparing teachers, and especially if parents are anxious about having this conversation, then education's a great inroad to be thinking about how we do that. But if we're in the business of educating children and we're leaving out the stories of many, many Black and brown children, then we're not providing equal access to education, right? And that is the mission of public schools. So thinking about curriculum as a place to start, and I know that's something that my kids have really asking for.
I think it's wonderful that your children are asking for the new curriculum. I think it suggests a level of growing awareness that, that's very positive development, and hopefully they'll find it. And Kabria, I know that part of your work and part of your book is bringing knowledge of the contributions of the past. Like when you came on the radio, on the old morning show, the radio version of the morning show, to talk about In Pursuit of Knowledge, we talked about the amazing stories of these African-American women and girls in the 19th century on the North Shore who were fighting in the most strategic and sometimes successful ways to bring about school integration. And as we talked about, most of us think of school integration as starting with Brown v. Board of Education. And so you have to fill in that mosaic of history, because you won't really be able to understand what's happening now if you don't really understand the full story of what's happened in the past. So just to see your thoughts about the same question that you posed to Erin, are there things as you talk to younger people that you feel like you're learning from them, or that make you feel hopeful about where things might go from here?
I think I'm really hopeful when I'm working in the classroom with my college students, some of whom, probably the vast majority of whom, are from New England. They're from New Hampshire. And they are taking my class. I teach courses on slave narratives and African-American literature and race and education. And they are always so eager to learn. It's almost like they're just waiting for the opportunity, because they realize, as Erin was saying, that some of the schooling that they received, right, K through 12, did not teach them that fuller history, that more inclusive history. And so they're very excited to be in that classroom learning. And I remember one student, I was talking to her about slavery in New England, because, that's always really interesting. It's a great field right now, right? It's growing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so people are realizing slavery existed in New England. And even after it was, gradually abolished, the North benefited, New England benefited greatly from slavery. And so my students, I'm talking about the fugitive slave law. I'm talking about, Boston, slave rescues. And, she told me, she said, I had no idea that this history, I had no idea that it was so close to home. And she's like, I'm wondering, am I behind? And when she phrased it that way, I was thinking to myself, wow, I told her she's not. It's great that she's in college, she's learning this, and she's taking this class. But I started to think about, we're actually really depriving our children and our students by not giving them this fuller history. And as you were saying, Mary, that then they can't really understand the 2020 uprisings.
Right.
It comes out of nowhere for them.
Right.
If they don't have this longer history, this greater context. So I'm hopeful that a lot of college students, are going to be taking classes in, Africana studies, ethnic studies, women's studies. But I agree with Erin that this needs to start much, much earlier. And we can look at our own local history to tell the stories too of people of color.
I think
Go ahead, Erin.
I teach graduate students primarily who are hoping to become teachers and school psychologists. And I'm teaching a course right now, and my students are really deeply grappling with their return to school and the way in which they're going to practice in a way that's trauma informed, and that the conversations when they enter the classroom have to begin with conversations about white supremacy, racial justice, and equity, that they can't go back to school without putting this first in their classrooms. And I feel really encouraged by the fact that they want over the summer to gain the skills to enter into the classroom, being ready to open those conversations.
Yeah.
So there's no fear anymore. I don't think there's any time or place for fear. I think they feel like this is meeting the moment, and the only way that educators are going to serve the students that they have.
Well, Kabria and Erin, thank you so much. I so appreciate your taking the time. You've had just such wonderful responses, great examples, and wonderful ideas. And I don't know, you make me feel inspired. You make me feel hopeful. And I really appreciate your coming on the morning show. Thank you so much. It's been a joy to have you here. So thank you.
I think we have to give kids hope, right? Like that's our role.
Yeah, absolutely. We all need hope. We all need hope. Absolutely. And the two of you make me feel hopeful. So thank you so much for coming on the morning show. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right. Take care now. And we're going to shift now and bring Vicki Hendrickson on screen. Vicki is here to talk about the diverse summer offerings of the Newburyport Adult Education. I think we just need to get you unmuted, Vicki, the little red microphone in the bottom of your screen, if you could unmute it, and then we'll get your sound on and talk about. There you go. Great. Hi, Vicki.
Right,
welcome. Nice to see you.
The segment and before me.
Weren't they great? Yes,
Absolutely.
They were, weren't they?
Absolutely. Oh.
Yeah, really.
This is, I'll just briefly say this. It has nothing to do with current adult education, but, I was raised in the South, and I worked for the whole Dr. Martin Luther King program in Washington, not the 64, not 1964, but in 1969, there was a big thing coming, Resurrection City. But anyway, all this stuff has been going on for so long, and you think, can't we get this solved? Can't we? Really. But boy, it's, I think their idea of starting early, if the school boards and if the parents will be open to the notion that there's history beyond white people's history.
Yes,
and,
then they're intertwined. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's hard, and all this stuff has to be, we have to deal with the adults too. A few years ago, we all read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book. I don't know if you participated in that, but anyway, we had a facilitator, a Black man, Michael Eatman, come and help teachers and help adults figure out why is this still going on, and how can we overcome our own racism? How can we be sensitized to it? So it's a complicated problem.
It's a complicated, persistent problem, and yet
it just won't go away.
Yeah. Well, hopefully something has happened, as we were saying.
I hope so.
We all hope so. We all hope so.
So many times that I think
I know.
Can't figure it out.
Yeah.
So anyway, just to shift over to adult ed.
Yes. Okay. So
we have classes when we're meeting in our real world on this very subject. And Marion Levy and Catherine Blake are pretty much the two people that offer courses on that. What we're going to be doing in the fall is still unclear.
I was going to ask you about that.
From what I can tell, I don't think we'll be able to just jump right into the schools because they're struggling with enough challenges as it is.
That's for sure.
And to bring adults in, and then you do temperatures, and it's not that our classes are that big. They traditionally are not that big.
Yeah.
They're 6-7 people, so you wouldn't, you could certainly do the mask and the social distancing, but still,
it's complicated.
It's complicated, and nobody wants to add burdens to the school department.
Right, because they're going to be having
at least I don't. I think they have enough going on, and so let's just see let's just see how it all plays out. But I did ask if I could be on the reopening task force.
Oh, excellent.
I hope. I haven't heard anything back, but I just think there's so much, and then there may be new ways that adult ed can function. Right now I'm working with a person who runs a rehab, a group of rehab housing.
Uh-huh.
And so there may be something we can do with them. There may, you just have to keep pressing to see, all right, where can we be of help? What can we do to help somebody? And still do the things that we need to do. I mean, you know, finances are always the big issue because we don't get money from anybody, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're
we
self-supporting.
get money we get grants. I mean, we get grants from the institution, certainly, and from the Newburyport Bank and from other private foundations. So I don't want to say that but we don't get taxpayer money, is what I mean. So, but we've had some good classes. I mean, the writing classes have been filled each time, which is good. Poetry, even, and getting started as a writer and memoir and journaling. And so those have been really great. And we're starting a songwriting class. I'm hopeful that people will want to do that. That sounds fun, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Is that so tell us about the songwriting class. When does it start and what will it be like?
It's going to start, we just changed the date. So I think it's the 26th of July. Okay. But the guy is a poet. Al Basil's a poet. And he's taught at the Westchester Poetry something.
Jamboree.
Jamboree, yeah, let's call it that. Yeah, that's not what they call it. But anyhow, so we've got that. We've got drawing and painting coming up in the next week or so. We've got a couple of good photography classes, one just basic, and then the other one is contemplative photography. And so that's done very well. And then we have some practical classes like grant writing and things like that. So it's tricky to figure out what people are going to want to do online.
Yes, along those lines, I was so intrigued, Vicki, to see that you're offering, I think it starts July 28th, a stained glass class.
Yes, we had one before, and this is our second one. Yes, Leslie Doherty does a great job, and this is a perfect kind of class to run for moms and kids to do together. You buy a kit, and she shows you how to do it. Yeah,
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so that's just terrific. Yeah, and it's not very expensive. I mean, the kit is another $20, I think, or maybe $25. I'm not sure, but this is to make a mirror. And cute, yeah. I mean, they're
what
fun.
a great idea, and a great project for parents and kids to work on together at home.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
that's great.
And I think we're going to have a class on floor cloths. I don't know if you know what those are. They're pieces of canvas that you paint as you would paint a painting, and then you put a lot of protective stuff on it, and you use it as a rug.
What a great idea. I've seen those on sale in stores, and they're incredibly expensive. So I'm sure this is a way to get a less expensive one. Make your own. Also a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
I see that you also have a writing class for experienced writers. Elizabeth Barrett, I think, is doing one.
Yes, now that's sold out right now.
It did? Okay, all right.
Sold out. But we have, but you know, we'll have it again. I mean, we're just, some of these we just keep rolling over, you know, because ordinarily we would not do much in the summer because people would be out and about, but they're not out and about.
No, not nearly as much as we used to be.
They need to be doing something. And of course, Dyke has had his second class of Life Along the Merrimack is this coming Friday, but he'll do that again, I'm sure.
Okay.
And yeah, so that got a good response. And then we are going to have a writers contest this year. We're just getting ready to announce it. We haven't quite decided on the theme. I mean, the obvious kind of theme is COVID-19 and you know, what did you do during COVID-19? But I think,
enough already.
I mean, okay, we lived it. You want to write about it? I was thinking of something more like gardening, or what hobby did you pick up in the last 4 months? What discovery did you make not about staying home with them or walking around with a mask on, but what else did you come up with?
Yeah.
So I haven't worked on the title. I mean, I haven't figured it out yet, but
yeah.
I hope.
I'm sure you'll get one. A thought I have is silver linings of what happened during the pandemic. Because I think that finding things to be grateful for is always a good discipline in life.
Yeah. I like that. That's great.
Good. Yeah. Well, Vicki, it just sounds like a lot of creativity has gone into coming up with ideas for courses that people could do virtually. And I think it's an impressive amount of creativity. It's also a great gift to the community because we need outlets. And they also give people a sense that at a time when people are often feeling very isolated, people can feel like they're learning something in collaboration with others. And even though it's a virtual community, it's still a community.
It is. And
so I think that's wonderful.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
I'm taking some classes myself, and just to see how it goes, because when I was at UNH, I got a master's in adult education there, and my focus was distance learning, but completely different. This was 20 years ago, so different world now. Yeah. But and it certainly took us a while to figure it all out.
Yeah.
I mean, it was challenging, but I think that, people now, you do feel connected when you're on a show with other people or you're in a room with other people on Zoom, and you do feel more connected than you would have thought before you did it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm part of the Newburyport Choral Society, and of course we sadly had to cancel our spring concert, and choruses are super spreaders, so we won't be singing together anytime soon. But we had our annual meeting on last night anyway, which we do every year. And so we had like 70 or 80 people in a Zoom chat room where there were several different pages. But you know what? It was just great to see people's smiley little faces, smiley little 2-inch faces.
I agree. Did you sing anything?
No, we didn't online. There was a tribute. Of course, our choral director is leaving, George Case, and our new director, Ryan Turner, who will be coming. We're fortunate in both of them. So there was some of the choral members had pre-recorded song tributes to George.
Oh, nice. That's
so it was very nice, but it was simply wonderful to be able to have Zoom to do something like that.
Yeah,
so I think it's a great contribution that you've been made to actually, instead of not having summer offerings, to actually beef up your summer offerings and find ways that people can come together and learn.
That's all you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
That's right.
Just keep trucking.
That's right. What else can we do? Hang in there. Final question. Are there any instructors that you're looking for? Any topics you're hoping to find somebody for?
I think I would just do a blank request because I can't. We have people who teach the regular things, but if somebody has an idea that they want to run by me, like someone just sent in a thing for aromatherapy. All right, well, I wouldn't have thought of that. Huh. But it's common sense essentials to it's an essential oil therapy. Sorry.
Ah, okay.
So, yeah. I mean, but people have little hobbies that they have everywhere, little things that they're interested in, and just get in touch with me.
Okay.
And you can go to the website, which is www.newburyport.adult.ed, and the phone number, I've got to get changed to my home phone number because I don't get to school very often.
I'm sure. Yeah, not these days. So
not these days.
Well, Vicki, that sounds wonderful. Something for everybody.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you so much for.
you're surviving this in good tact.
You bet. Vicki, it's always good to see you and always interesting to learn about the different offerings. There's always something new, always something creative going on, as well as the old favorites. So thank you very much for coming to the morning show.
Thank you for having me.
All right,
Nice
you
to
bet.
see you, Mary. Take care now.
Yeah, you take care too. Everybody, that's it for this week's morning show. And if you missed part of today's show, it will be available for viewing on the Port Media YouTube channel playlist for the morning show at www.ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday mornings at 8 a.m. And then again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. And will also be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just click on the cloud icon at www.ncmhub.org. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you'll join us next Thursday on the morning show as well. Next week, our topic is going to be coping with loss and finding resilience during the pandemic, which has brought all of us one form of loss or another. Some of us may have lost family or friends to COVID. All of us have had ongoing losses every day, I think, as we deal with loss of jobs, the opportunity to see friends, the loss of places or seasonal activities that usually give us joy and ground us in our sense of who we are. So to talk about those things, Barbara Hopkinson will be here. She's going to help us understand our responses to losses, the importance of grieving them, and ways to generate resilience. Barbara's an expert on these endeavors, having experienced numerous major losses herself. She's a grief recovery method expert and the founder of A Butterfly's Journey, as well as the local chapter of Compassionate Friends. And you'll learn more about those organizations and the work they do on grief and resilience next week. Also, for anybody who's been pining for Major League Baseball, historian and baseball superfan, Anthony Guerrero will be here, and he will be talking to us about the legendary Red Sox slugger Ted Williams. So baseball fans, you won't want to miss that. Join us next week, everybody. Thanks for watching and listening today, and we'll see you back on the airwaves next Thursday at 9 a.m. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.